Welcome everybody to today's Equity Accountability System informational webinar. I'm going to advance the slide and turn it over.
Great, thank you, Mike. Welcome everyone. I want to introduce myself first. My name is Casey Doyle. I am a fellow on the Distributed Energy Resources team at Energy Solutions and the strategy team leader for the Illinois Shines Adjustable Block Program, or APB as it's known. I'm excited to be working on such a meaningful program, and I look forward to working with all of you. We are thankful to have Sharon Johnson. She is the DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager on the call, as well as Sarah Duffy, the IPA Associate Legal Counsel. And we're also going to be talking more about the Equity Accountability System. And so both Sharon and Sarah will be providing that information. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone is going to be muted during the presentation. The presentation will be recorded. If you have any questions along the way, be sure to use the Q&A part of the panel that you see at the bottom of your screen. That's where you can type in a question and we'll be reviewing those. And there will be a Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. If at any point you become disconnected or have technical difficulties, please try to, quote, hang up and try to reconnect. All right, if we could go to the next slide. So again, welcome everyone. We are going to we are really going to go over quite a bit today. We just want to first start by thanking you for joining us. We're really, really excited to be sharing this information with you and being here as a support system for you. This is our first informational webinar on the Equity Accountability System, which we hope will serve as a helpful introduction and overview for you all. We'll continue to offer support in this area with more webinars and guidance in the future. So in terms of our goals for today, we really want to just introduce the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Goals and Requirements that was introduced by the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA, as it's known locally, and the 2022 Long-Term Plan, including the Equity Accountability System. We also wanted to share today the Equity Accountability System as it applies to AVs and designees, including the equity eligible contractor category and minimum equity standards, so that you're able to understand the minimum equity standards and the forthcoming system and understand the qualifications to become an equity eligible contractor and how to apply for certification. We also want to be able to introduce you to the program administrators, sector strategists, and team members who can support AVs and designees in this area. And again, provide a forum for questions and feedback from the program administrator and IPA. Next slide. Our agenda today is to go over the webinar goals and then introduce you to diversity, equity, and inclusion as it applies to the Adjustable Block Program. And specifically talk about CEJA and its framework, the APB and the Equity Accountability System, give you an overview, and then talk about monitoring, reporting, facilitation, and studies. We'll also touch on minimum equity standards, the equity eligible contractor category, and again, have a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, oops, are we still on slide 4? Yeah, I just wanted to introduce Sharon from the IPA, who will take on the next few slides. Sharon?
Thank you, Casey. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharon Johnson. As Casey mentioned, I am the DEI manager for the Illinois Power Agency. And in my role, I'm responsible for overseeing implementation of the new requirements for the agency's renewable energy programs and procurements. And I also help the agency to enhance its internal commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide. So CEJA Diversity and Equity Framework, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was enacted September 2021, roughly a year ago, to provide access to the clean energy economy and encourage solar energy projects to use a more diverse and equitable workforce to include contractors, minority-owned businesses, small and disadvantaged businesses, as well as graduates of any workforce training programs that have especially been impacted by imbalanced levels of pollution. Usually these populations are excluded from economic opportunities within the energy sector. So some main attributes passed in CEJA to provide a framework for diversity, equity, and inclusion are primarily the most applicable to the Adjustable Block Program is establishing the EAS system, or the Equity Accountability System, to basically ensure that participants in the renewable energy programs and procurements are making and achieving their commitments to use or utilize a more diverse set of contractors and a diverse set of workers. So this system also includes the minimum equity standards, and the delivery year for this system is scheduled to begin June of 2023. Another DEI requirement under CEJA is the racial disparity study. And this is to provide review and analysis of the state's renewable energy sector for access, participation, and utilization of contractors. And this will be with a special emphasis on small and disadvantaged businesses and workers. A third attribute is the data collection from program participants. This will be used to determine equitable performance on these contracts and hold entities responsible for elevating equitable practices. So the purpose of data collection, analysis, and some reporting will be critical to ensure that the benefits of clean energy economy are equitably distributed across the state of Illinois. And the last pillar under the DEI CEJA framework is the creation of the Energy Workforce Equity Database. And this is to establish an online publicly accessible tool to assist engagement of the EECs and equity eligible persons to acquire such features as job postings, recruiting opportunity, and information on workforce training service providers and some training opportunities. Next slide. So participant requirements for the equity accountability system. Few of the features or components that comprise the accountability system are number one, the minimum equity standards. And today I'll talk a little bit about the equity eligible category that's within the Adjustable Block Program. The minimum equity standards of the accountability system are applicable to all the applicants of the BP or ABP system and competitive procurements. And it requires that participating vendors in the Adjustable Block Program and competitive procurements demonstrate at least 10% of their project workforce is equitable eligible persons after the first delivery year. And again, that starts in June of 2023. That minimum will increase to about 30% of the project workforce being equity eligible persons or contractors by the year 2030. And secondly, the equity eligible contractor category for the Adjustable Block Program, CEJA created a new category in ABP reserved for applications from EECs, equity eligible contractors. So projects from equity eligible contractors will also have the option for advancement of capital after the REC contract is signed and finalized. And this is to address barriers to access for capital. Next slide. So reporting and assessment of the EAS. The features listed on this slide support through the revision of the long-term renewable resources procurement plan, the equity eligible system by identifying the current numbers of EECs certified by the agency, providing training, guidance, and additional support for AVs, their designees, and equity eligible contractors, as well as other stakeholders, and creating a waiver application process in the rare instance of the inability to fulfill any of the minimum equity standards. Next slide. And now my colleague Sarah Duffy will review some portions of the minimum equity standard system.
Thanks, Sharon. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the content of the minimum equity standard and the process for complying with it. You can move to the next slide, please. So the minimum equity standards, as Sharon mentioned, apply to all of the projects that are accepted or approved in the adjustable block program. All approved vendors that expect to submit an application for a project in that upcoming year must plan to comply with this standard. For the program year, the minimum equity standard will be 10%. So the standard is a percentage of the project workforce that must be comprised of equity eligible persons. And I will get to the definition of an equity eligible person in future slides. So we start with the statutorily required minimum of 10%, but we are required to gradually increase that minimum percentage to 30% by 2030. So future long-term plans will set out the actual progression of that minimum standard between 2024 and 2030. I also just want to note that the law does allow the agency to adjust the minimum equity standard percentage depending on the results and the outcomes that we're seeing, to create different standards for different regions of the state or different types of vendors. So that has not been necessary yet. In those first 2 years of application, we're going to apply the same standard across all applicants, but that ability is there if we need to use it in future program years. Next slide, please. So the definition of an equity eligible person is actually set out in statute. So we don't have any flexibility in this. There are 4 ways that a person may be certified as an equity eligible person. They can provide evidence that they are a graduate or current or former participant in a select set of training programs, either the training programs that were established under the Future Energy Jobs Act back in 2017, or the training programs that have been established and are new under CEJA. Additionally, there are 3 other ways that someone may qualify as an equity eligible person: if they are a graduate of or currently enrolled in the foster care system, if they were formerly incarcerated, or if they are a resident of an equity eligible investment community. An equity eligible investment community is also defined in the statute, and we will have a way to look up addresses in the eventual fully launched energy workforce equity database that Sharon mentioned. So I just want to pause here because we have been getting, some feedback from approved vendors that are concerned because the new training workforce programs that were created under CEJA are still being developed by the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. And so they may not be up and accepting enrollees by the time that the first year of compliance with the minimum equity standard starts. First, there are 3 other categories of ways that people can qualify as equity eligible persons. So we want to encourage everyone to really make use of all of the different paths to qualification. And second, all of the FEJA funded training programs are also eligible as a basis for certifying someone as an equity eligible person. And then finally, an equity eligible contractor is simply a business or organization that is majority owned by eligible persons or majority governed by eligible persons. So the certification process essentially is just adds another step. So you still have to certify that person as an equity eligible person. And then you just additionally certify that they have kind of majority ownership or controlling majority governing power over the entity at issue. Next slide, please. So once we've established what an equity eligible person is, in moving to how approved vendors and designees can comply with the minimum equity standard, there are a few requirements. The statute requires that all applicants file an annual compliance plan. So at the beginning of the year, all AVs that are submitting projects into the program that year have to submit a compliance plan, essentially laying out how they plan on meeting that equity standard. They will be given the chance to amend compliance plans after we have reviewed them. And there is an option of seeking a waiver, but we really encourage everyone to use that only in, as a last resort if you are truly unable to fill the standard. And we don't have a full laid out details on the waiver process. We are going to be covering that in a later webinar, and also developing a more detailed plan for how to review those as the delivery year approaches. Next slide. So what the compliance plan should entail or should include, first is just a statement affirming intent to comply with the equity accountability or the minimum equity standard. So a statement and a narrative description of how the applicant plans to meet that commitment. We also hope to see some projections based on what you believe your workforce is going to look like in terms of where those equity eligible persons might come from. Whether you plan to use any equity eligible contractors as subcontractors, if the applicant itself is a minority or MWBE or disabled or veteran-owned business. Some of these attributes are really for our data collection and tracking purposes. If an applicant is in one of those classified businesses, that does not necessarily mean that they are an equity eligible contractor. So I just want to flag that because there is some data collection that is not directly related to the attributes that would qualify someone as an equity eligible person or an equity eligible contractor. We also hope that the plans will include communications for outreach, communication plans for local outreach, how you plan on contacting potential equity eligible persons about job opportunities, and then any updates from previous compliance plans that address any shortfalls or barriers that we're seeing in previous years. And AVs do not need to report on the data of their designees, but we do want them to flag which designees they're working with so that we can get an entire picture of that project's related workforce. Next slide, please. So we will be reviewing these compliance plans, scoring them on a very simple 1, 2, 3 rating scale. If a plan receives a rating of 1, we are going to have to ask the AV to address any missing items or incomplete fields and resubmit so that they can continue with their applications. A rating of 2 or 3 means that the compliance plan was adequate. We hope to see a lot of exceeds requirements because we do want to see some AVs trying to go beyond the minimum equity standard and do the work to go above and beyond the minimum. Next slide, please. So these are some recommended avenues for engaging potential equity eligible persons. These are things that we hope to see in compliance plans as methods that you plan to use to reach out to these potential employees. So things like educational workshops that are given locally for people in that particular workforce, using DCEO's workforce hubs to allow for job shadowing. Once the workforce equity database is fully fleshed out and launched, being sure that you're posting things on that and trying to contact equity eligible persons through that database. Attending job fairs, using community colleges and trade schools, looking for special funding for developing apprenticeships and training programs, connecting with local community-based organizations. There are a lot that provide wraparound services to enable some of these particular populations to get the jobs and be able to comply with the requirements of the position. And then, you know, we also want to serve as a resource for you all as well as the program administrator. So please do reach out to us with questions. Next slide. So I'm going to pass it over to Sharon, and she's going to speak specifically about applying projects into the equity eligible contractor category.
Thank you, Sarah. Next slide. So as mentioned, here's an overview of EECs, or equity eligible contractors. Again, CEJA has created a category in the adjustable block program reserved for the applicants or applications from equity eligible contractors to have an option for the advancement of capital. Again, after the contract is signed and finalized, to address the barriers. But you will need to apply to become certified as an EEC first. So, and an approved vendor can qualify for EEC certification if partners meet the requirements of a business that is majority owned, as Sarah said, by equity eligible persons. Next slide. So the definition, which is status under any one of these categories, will qualify as EEC certification for approved vendors. That's anyone who's graduated, or if you're currently a participant in one of the workforce training programs mentioned here, the Clean Energy Contractor Incubator Program, Returning Citizen, Clean Jobs Training Program, Solar Training and Multicultural Jobs Program. Graduates, people who are graduates from currently enrolled foster care system, formerly incarcerated persons, and or people who primarily are residents or qualify as being in an equity eligible investment community. Next slide. And lastly, for the program year 2022 to 2023, the EEC block capacity is 144.63 megawatts. So what this means is the EECs can apply for advanced capital for up to half of the contract value of their contract. That's what's executed in this block. EEC certified as AVs are not limited to this particular EEC block, and projects qualify if submitted as an approved vendor who is designated as an EEC. So with that, next slide. I'm going to turn it back over to our program administrator, Energy Solutions, to review support and questions.
Thank you, Sharon.
All right, so we wanted just to spend a few minutes talking about the type of support that our team will be providing AVs in this area. Could we go to the next slide, please? So our team model really represents an expansion of support to stakeholders, providing more staff resources to approved vendors, their designees, customers, and others. And that includes updated resources and sector strategists. Sector strategists work closely with AVs and designees to provide support and resources so that they understand and adhere to program rules. We also can provide or facilitate technical support, and that's sector specific support, insights, and resources so that we're able to increase the participation of EECs and AV success within the equity accountability system. Next slide. So what we've outlined here is the sector strategist support. It includes 6 areas, and we have an email dedicated to each area: small DG, large DG, community solar, community-driven community solar, public schools, and EECs. General and ongoing support or general technical support, you can still email admin@illinoisapp.com, but these emails are for those AVs who are submitting projects in these areas, just a way for us to provide more specific support to those areas. Next slide. All right, and then just a couple of notes on what to expect next. So we will have a second webinar on this topic. We are still determining the date on that, but we're looking for the first half of November. We will also be providing further details on compliance plans, waivers, and other documentation for this entire segment. And in January, between January and March of next year, we'll be hosting compliance plan training and workshops and distributing materials for the EAS. And then in Q2 2023, that's when compliance plans applications will need to start getting submitted, and we'll be sending out reminders on the date, which is the deadline, which is June 1st, 2023, and providing additional support during that time as well. Also of note, our updated website content, the guide to the equity accountability system, and Spanish language materials are also on deck to be added as further support. Next slide. All right, and as one of the requirements for this system, we do need to document that you attended these webinars. And so we have an attestation form for you to fill out. If you can scan this QR code or copy the website that you see here, that will guide you to an attestation form to fill out and submit. It also includes a space for AVs and designees to briefly describe how they will incorporate training around the EAS requirements to applicable employees and representatives. So we're really encouraging you to share this recording with others on your team who will be working to record and submit your efforts in EAS. Next slide, please. All right, so that ends our presentation for today. I know we wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions and answers, but I first just want to thank you for attending today. We were really excited to share this information with you, and we look forward to working with you in the future and providing additional resources to you. So, Mike, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the questions, if there were any that stood out as ones that we could share.
Yeah, so thank you to everybody who's been attending today, but also submitting questions. We're answering some of those live with written answers, and we're happy to share our panelists' expertise on some questions now. The first thing I'm going to do is return it to Sarah Duffy, who's going to speak to a few questions that are coming in on what constitutes a project workforce, eligibility, numbers, et cetera. So Sarah, feel free to tackle a couple of those that have come in, if you would so kindly.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So there are a couple of questions that have come in on the definition of project workforce, particularly on location of the workers. So the long-term plan has a much more detailed definition, so I really encourage everyone to read the full definition that is included there. But I will just say, in terms of location, all construction-related jobs that are located in Illinois count as part of the project workforce, and regardless of where the workers reside. And then all non-construction activity related jobs related to that specific project that are located in Illinois. So if you have staff located out of state, those staff would not be included in the denominator for the project workforce for determining the minimum equity standard. Again, there's more detailed definition in the long-term plan, so please base any decisions based on what the definition in writing in the plan says. Let's see. There's a question about some of the categories for qualifying as an equity eligible contractor in terms of what it means to be a graduate or former enrollee in the foster care system, and then what it means to be formerly incarcerated. These are really good questions, and I think they deserve a little bit more fleshing out on our side for eligibility criteria. So I'm going to take those back to the team and hopefully be able to provide some more detail on that in time for anyone who's planning to submit certification requests. And then another question that has come up is whether the minimum equity standard applies just to construction. It does not. It applies to all workers that are working on that project located in Illinois. And so what I want to emphasize with this is that the purpose of the minimum equity standard is to ensure that the economic opportunities created by these projects are being equitably provided or accessible to these equity eligible persons. And so, you know, these economic opportunities are not just going to be in the construction field. They're also going to be in sales and marketing, in financing and contracting. So those jobs that are created in Illinois should also be accessible to equity eligible persons. So that is kind of the basis for including non-construction jobs in the equity eligible or in the minimum equity standard. And to be clear, the 10% is number of persons for the minimum equity standard. It is not hours on the project. It is the number of persons employed as that are part of the workforce. The review process for the compliance plans is laid out in more detail in the long-term plan. I don't know the timelines off the top of my head, but there is a certain window given for correcting any inconsistencies or providing additional information where needed, but please check the long-term plan for the exact timeline. There are some other questions in here that really are program details that are covered in the long-term plan and in the program guidebook. So please do make sure that you check all of those.
Sarah,
Mike,
while you
I'm
look
not
for
sure
another
if you
one.
want to jump in. They're coming in quite fast, so I'm having a little trouble keeping up.
Yeah, sure. Let me do that. One thing I want to do is move back to this slide, which was requested so that people can see where the attestation resides, including these links, and the short URL, the bit.ly, is going to include the form. One of the other things I wanted to share with our apologies from the program administrators, that on slide 10, as the standards and levels of MES participation kick off, those will start in program year 2023-2024. We erroneously said beginning in program year 2022 to 2023. So a few of you have raised that, and that should be corrected, as we will do in the follow-up to 2023-2024.
So a couple of people have asked about how you would know if someone is formerly enrolled in the foster care system or formerly incarcerated, and whether there are any legal risks with asking those questions. So the legal risk is only if you are discriminating against someone based on those attributes. There's really, what we would encourage you to do is talk to your employees, do a broad general request for voluntary disclosures instead of not make it compulsory, but try to see if someone is comfortable to voluntarily disclose that they qualify, and maybe list all of the categories and ask for voluntary disclosures that they qualify as one of those categories without having to disclose to you which category it is, and let them come to us to get certified if that's more comfortable for them. We recognize that these are sensitive attributes to disclose to your employer. So we do want to try to work with you all to try to find the best way to do that, that captures the data and reassures your employees that it will be used for reporting purposes and not for retaliation or discrimination or any of those things. It is not being used to kind of try to single them out. And then another question is about the timeline for getting certification. I know Audrey's on. I don't know if we have or maybe Energy Solutions can talk to this, whether we have an average turnover time. I know it's pretty fast for getting the certifications back to the AV.
Thanks, Sarah. Casey, is that something that you're in position to share? Is it more easily presented following the webinar with some further analysis? Anything you'd like to speak to in terms of the certification review?
So in terms of the review for this process, it should, like Sarah said, be fairly quick, but I don't have an exact date or amount of time. So we can provide that in the follow-up Q&A document.
Wonderful, thanks. I think many of our remaining questions are related to, again, qualification as an equity eligible person, some of the qualifiers and understanding those categories and the specifics there. So I think we're caught up. Sarah also spoke to how you might broadly ask some information versus specific individual questions to determine and request that individuals identify qualification as an equity eligible person. So I think we're caught up on our questions now. I want to ask our presenters, particularly those who haven't spoken last moments, if there are any additional points you'd like to share. We will follow up with both the full Q&A of those items that we responded to by writing, but also verbally here. We have a few more moments. Would anybody else like to add anything or any other nuances we can speak to?
Mike, this is Sharon. I'd like to just basically add that the point of the accountability system, again, is to utilize persons who have been historically or systematically discriminated against out of the, for the energy sector. So these efforts are in conjunction with making sure that the industry is more equitable towards folks in these populations. So that's the point of having these exercises and being able to make AVs and others accountable for the expansion of inclusion.
Thank you, Sharon. I want to ask, we've got a couple more questions that have come in. If that's okay, I'll put a, looks like we're going to add a link to the attestation, which you can't grab from the screen, but we'll put that in the chat right now. We do have a question about the program's applicability to subcontractors of designees. Is that something that our panelists can speak to, or is that nuanced in the long-term plan where a written explanation would serve us better?
Audrey, I think that's asking a question about nested designees, and would nested designees be required to comply with the minimum equity standards? And I think that's something we would want to give a written response on so we can clarify all the nuances of that.
Okay, wonderful. If there aren't further items, I can return the floor to Casey for some closing remarks. I'm going to add the URL for the attestation in the chat right now. And again, we thank everybody for joining today. Casey, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. Just again, want to echo Mike's thank yous and everyone else's thank yous. This was a great way to just share this information out. We just want to remind you that as a follow-up, we will be sending out a link to this recording, a documentation of the questions and answers that were part of this session, and we'll provide that in our weekly AV emails, the weekly updates. So look for those there, as well as the date for the next webinar, which we indicated we'll be hosting in early part of November. With that, we will end the recording and wish everyone a great day.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to sharing the materials out. Thanks for your participation and making the program better.